Welcome. We've gathered an incredible stack of sources today to analyze a piece of culture that, well, it's less than 8 minutes long, but it managed to change the entire landscape of media, entertainment, and even intellectual property law.
It's true. The film we're looking at is the 1928 animated short, Steamboat Willie. And for generations, it's been the visual shorthand for classic animation, the whistling boat captain, the black and white icon.
Hmm.
But if you actually move past that nostalgia, what you find is a true foundational text of 20th century global culture.
Our mission here is specifically for you, the listener, who provided this material. We're going to move past just a simple scene-by-scene recounting of, Mickey and Minnie on a steamboat.
Right.
Instead, we're using these sources to really explore its revolutionary place in cinema history, the birth of this global icon, and its lasting, very complex cultural and legal footprint that extends right up to this very moment.
So let's anchor ourselves with the key facts just to set the stage. Steamboat Willie was released on November 18th, 1928. It was directed by Walt Disney and Ub Iwerks. And at 7 minutes and 47 seconds, its influence is just disproportionately immense.
And here's a critical piece of trivia that I think often gets lost in the legend. While this is considered the public debut of Mickey and Minnie Mouse, it was actually the third Mickey film they produced.
That's a huge point. The two before it, Plain Crazy and The Galloping Gaucho, were silent shorts, and they just failed to find a distributor.
So Walt Disney was basically facing commercial failure. He knew this third attempt had to be fundamentally different just to survive.
And that difference, which is the singular defining reason we're even talking about this specific short almost a century later, was the inclusion of fully synchronized sound.
A total game changer.
That decision didn't just save a character. It really set the entire course for modern animation.
Okay, let's unpack that technical leap, because in 1928, this short was nothing less than a technical marvel. We have to set the scene. The silent era was crashing to a close after the huge success of The Jazz Singer in 1927.
Right. The whole industry was scrambling to add sound. But it was a messy, really complex process, especially for animation, which, requires perfect timing.
And that's where the specific, groundbreaking nature of Disney's achievement lies. The sources are careful to clarify that Steamboat Willie was not the first cartoon to incorporate sound.
Not at all. Studios like Inkwell had a series called Song Cartoons that started way back in 1924, and those had sound elements. But those early films, they sort of treated sound as a novelty, maybe a musical accompaniment that played loosely with the action.
But the crucial differentiator for Disney was achieving fully synchronized sound, and that's a huge step up.
It is. Synchronization meant the movements on screen, Mickey's whistling, the specific whistles of the boat, even the grunts matched the audio perfectly, down to the frame.
And earlier attempts couldn't do that.
No. I mean, something like Paul Terry's Dinner Time, which actually beat Steamboat Willie to release by a month. It had sound, but it couldn't maintain that precise timing. It led to this kind of awkward, slightly detached feeling when you watched it.
So the technology was sort of there, but the execution was the real innovation. How did Disney and Iwerks pull that off when everyone else was failing?
The solution they came up with was just brilliant for its time. And honestly, it's still foundational to how films are scored today. They used a technological aid called a click track.
A click track, what is that exactly?
It's basically a precisely timed audio cue for the musicians. It kept them perfectly on beat and on tempo while they were recording the soundtrack. And that innovation turned the short from a cartoon with some noise into a fully integrated, synchronized performance where the music and the sound effects became part of the story itself.
And the push for this massive technical risk, according to his brother Roy, came directly from Walt seeing The Jazz Singer.
Exactly. He realized that sound wasn't just a gimmick. It was a necessary tool to elevate the art form. He saw synchronization as the essential element to make his struggling new character, Mickey Mouse, more appealing.
He knew sound would give the character a personality that just visual gags couldn't sustain in this new era.
Absolutely. And to do it, the studio licensed a system called Powers Cinephone.
And the sources note that the origin of that Cinephone system itself is a bit murky legally, which kind of foreshadows the film's entire later history, doesn't it?
It really does. It wasn't proprietary tech that Disney developed from scratch. The Cinephone was basically a cloned, updated version of Lee DeForest's older phonofilm sound-on-film system.
So Pat Powers, the guy who distributed the film and owned the system, he just copied it.
Essentially, yes. He tried to acquire DeForest technology before and failed. So he ended up hiring a former DeForest technician, William Garrity, to produce this clone. He really capitalized on DeForest's weak financial position, which meant he couldn't mount a legal challenge at the time.
So Walt was betting the entire future of his company on this cutting edge but also legally dubious technology from a very shrewd distributor. Why take that risk? Was the technical advantage really worth it?
Well, Walt was desperate, but he was also a visionary. The technical edge of the Cinephone, its improved ability to maintain a consistent tempo, was exactly what they needed. It provided the synchronization that other systems just didn't have.
And the success of Steamboat Willie made that system dominant, at least for a little while.
It did. It completely validated Walt's enormous gamble. But, as you alluded to, that business arrangement with Pat Powers was incredibly short-lived.
Right. The sources mention it dissolved almost immediately in 1930 over a financial dispute. And the fallout was, well, devastating for Disney, at least for a time.
Indeed, Pat Powers didn't just stop distributing Disney shorts. He, and this is crucial, hired away Disney's lead animator and co-director, the indispensable Iwerks, to start his own studio.
What?
It just highlights that the foundation of Disney's success, this film, was built on a technically advanced but legally and commercially unstable partnership. The whole early history is a study in calculated high-stakes risk.
Let's talk about the sheer audacity of this production in financial terms. The total budget was, what, just under $5,000?
US $4,986.69 to be exact.
Which, when you adjust for inflation, our sources tell us that's about $91,000 today. That's a massive commitment for a short film at the time, especially when your two previous shorts with the same character were complete non-starters.
The cost is a testament to the risk and the investment required for the new sound technology. But the most colorful, and I think arguably the most important part of the whole production history, is that legendary first test screening. It was July 29th, 1928.
And this was Disney trying to prove the concept could even work before they spent all that money on an official studio recording.
Exactly, and the setup was something else.
Wait, is this the story where they projected the film through a window onto a bedsheet and the sound crew used spittoons for bells? That sounds less like cinematic genius and more like inspired, desperate genius.
It was pure improvisation. The screening was for Disney employees and their wives, right next to Walt's office. To mask the projector noise, which would have ruined the whole illusion, Roy Disney had to operate it from outside, shining the image through a window.
Onto a bedsheet that Iwerks had hung up.
That's right. And the sound crew, positioned behind that sheet, were basically performing the entire complex soundtrack live.
It was a makeshift orchestra.
Totally.
Yeah.
Wilfred Jackson was on a mouth organ for the score, Iwerks used pots and pans for percussion, and Johnny Cannon was improvising with slide whistles and, yes, spittoons to replicate the boat's bells.
Yeah.
And Walt himself provided all the little grunts and squawks for the characters.
The genius of this, though, wasn't the quality of the sound, but the reaction from that small audience. What did Walt recall about that moment?
He famously said the effect was nothing less than electric. The audience responded immediately, profoundly, to the union of sound and motion. Iwerks said he was never so thrilled in his life.
And that profound, immediate validation of the concept that synchronization worked and audiences loved it, that gave Disney the certainty he needed to go forward and finance the real recording.
It did. But even with that confidence, the path wasn't easy. The first official attempt to record the final soundtrack with professional musicians failed spectacularly on September 15, 1928.
The synchronization just completely failed. It was a crisis.
It was. And this forced Disney to make a major personal sacrifice to finance a second, and thankfully successful, recording session. This crucial second attempt featured the Green Brothers Novelty Band, conducted by Carl Edward.
And that dedication is so tangible. To finance that critical second recording session, the research is clear. Walt Disney had to sell his personal car.
His Moon Roadster. It was an all-in bet on the future of his character and his studio. The successful second recording even used innovative methods, like projecting a simple graphic, basically an early bouncing ball, to help the orchestra maintain a steady tempo. An amazing precursor to modern timing tools.
So if we zoom out, Steamboat Willie wasn't just a successful cartoon. It was the moment that Walt Disney fully committed to the idea that animation must use the latest technology to enhance storytelling.
Absolutely. It established his studio as a vanguard of innovation. That focus on integrated, high-quality, sound-defined animation for decades, moving it far beyond the simple gags of the silent era. The success of those 7 minutes created the momentum for everything that followed.
Moving on from the technical side, let's explore how this film cemented the public identity of its main characters, even though aesthetically they're still very much evolving. This is the moment Mickey and Minnie Mouse were formally introduced to the world.
That's right. While they had appeared in those test screenings of the failed silent shorts, the public didn't see or react to them until Steamboat Willie. This short got all the credit for the debut because the sound made such an impact. It's the origin story that stuck.
The effective public birth of a global icon.
Exactly.
And the film also features a character who actually predates Mickey Mouse and would become his enduring nemesis, Captain Pete.
Pete, or Pegleg Pete, has a fascinating long history. He first appeared in 1925, years before Mickey was even conceived. Initially, he was the antagonist for Disney's very first major cartoon star, Julius the Cat.
Who was, I should add, an unlicensed derivative of Felix the Cat.
Yes, and Pete wasn't even depicted as a cat in his earliest days, was he?
No, initially he was a bear.
A bear, right. Then he transitioned to being the villain for Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. So by the time he shows up as Captain Pete in Steamboat Willie, yelling at Mickey on the bridge, the character had already been the main Disney villain for 3 years across multiple series.
It really shows how Disney recycled and adapted its few successful elements during that very precarious early period.
It does.
What's so fascinating about this moment, despite the sound revolution, is how minimal the actual dialogue is for the main characters. They're basically still pantomiming.
That's a key point. Mickey, Minnie, and Pete rely almost entirely on physical comedy, exaggerated expressions, growls, and squeaks. Walt Disney himself provided the few noises that stood in for dialogue. They weren't fully voiced characters yet.
And the only source of true, intelligible speech in the entire short comes from a very specific side character.
The ship's parrot.
And that parrot serves a dual role. It provides the only actual lines and also becomes the target of some of Mickey's earliest slapstick cruelty.
Precisely. The parrot's lines are pure antagonistic comedy. When Mickey falls down the stairs into a bucket of soapy water, the bird taunts him. "Hope you don't feel hurt, big boy. Ha 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 ha."
And later, when Mickey retaliates and throws the bucket on its head,
the parrot cries, "Help! Help! Man overboard!" and repeats that phrase later when Mickey knocks the bird into the river with a potato. The synchronization brings those two distinct, taunting phrases to life, making them incredibly memorable.
And tying into that theme of synchronization, the soundtrack relies heavily on established, recognizable music of the era, which grounds the short in its cultural moment.
Oh, absolutely. The music is highly nostalgic. The title Steamboat Willie itself is likely a nod to the 1928 Buster Keaton film Steamboat Bill Jr., which was a major release that year.
And the soundtrack features two big compositions.
That's right. Steamboat Bill, a song popularized in the 1910s, and the incredibly popular 19th century folk tune, Turkey in the Straw.
Okay, now we need to transition to an aspect of the film that modern viewers often struggle with. This short is a product of 1928 aesthetics, and those standards of physical comedy clash sharply with 21st century sensibilities.
Some viewers today characterize certain scenes as depicting overt animal cruelty.
And this raises an essential discussion about how cultural and ethical standards evolve in entertainment, right?
Exactly. Early animation and silent comedy relied heavily on kinetic violence and exaggerated pain for laughs. And Mickey Mouse, in this specific black and white version, is often seen less as a benevolent role model and more as an impulsive, sometimes aggressive vaudeville performer.
The most famous and later most controversial sequence happens after Minnie is rescued. A goat eats her sheet music, and Mickey's response is to turn the nearby livestock into musical instruments.
The sources detail this sequence thoroughly because it's so crucial for understanding the later censorship. Mickey starts by pulling a cat's tail and stretching a goose's throat to make sounds. But the most memorable and later censored part involves a sow nursing her piglets.
Right. He uses the piglets' tails and teats like accordion buttons.
He literally plays the sow like an accordion. Then he uses a cow's teeth as a xylophone. The whole scene is set to that highly rhythmic, synchronized soundtrack of Turkey in the Straw.
It's a moment of frantic, musical slapstick. But the fact that this scene needed to be censored decades later shows exactly how dramatically cultural attitudes changed. When did distributors start removing this part?
The censorship was applied during the 1950s, when the film was being packaged for television. Distributors felt that the part with Mickey tugging the baby pig's tails and kicking them off the sow's teats was inappropriate for mid-century family viewing.
And that specific segment was removed from most TV prints for years.
It was. But the integrity of the original work seems to have been restored in later home media releases, recognizing its historical value. The full original 1928 version, including the entire piglet scene, was later explicitly reinstated in the Walt Disney Treasures DVD set. That's now the standard version.
So that historical journey from novelty to controversial and finally to a preserved cultural artifact is a powerful illustration of changing societal boundaries.
Is.
The Mickey we meet in 1928 is not the sanitized, gentle global ambassador of later decades. He's a feistier, more anarchic character.
Precisely. And that anarchic energy was exactly what made him such a massive commercial success right out of the gate.
So let's look at that commercial response. That enormous financial and technical risk paid off spectacularly for Walt Disney.
It was an immediate sensation. The film premiered at Universal's Colony Theater in New York City on November 18, 1928. It was booked to play 5 times daily for 2 straight weeks. Crowds were massive.
And the sources confirm Walt Disney was paid $500 per week for that initial run.
Which is roughly $9,000 per week in today's money. An excellent return for a short film.
It's a remarkable cultural footnote that Steamboat Willie was such an immediate hit, while the feature film it was booked to play ahead of, a gangster movie called Gang War, is now a lost film.
The cartoon was the main event. And the critical reviews didn't just praise the entertainment value, they're focused heavily on the technical excellence.
Let's pull some of those quotes from the contemporary sources because they really confirm that the industry knew this was a game changer. What did Variety say?
Variety, just 3 days after the premiere, called it not the first animated cartoon to be synchronized with sound effects, but the first to attract favorable attention. They got it immediately.
Wow.
They praised its high order of cartoon ingenuity and concluded with the iconic phrase, "It was a peach of a synchronization job all the way." Right. They knew this was a new technical standard.
And the film Daily followed up a few days later, confirming its commercial value.
On November 25, 1928, they noted that the addition of sound resulted in a real tidbit of diversion, and they recommended it for any theater wired to reproduce sound on film. They were confirming its status not just as a great cartoon, but as a viable commercial product.
And beyond the box office and rave reviews, the film's legacy is cemented by formal recognition decades later, affirming its historical importance long after the technology became standard.
We can trace this through key milestones. In 1994, professional animators voted it the 13th greatest cartoon of all time, but the most prestigious recognition came in 1998.
That's when the United States Library of Congress selected the film for preservation in the National Film Registry.
Exactly. Being deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. That's a powerful statement about a 7-minute short with a slightly anarchic rodent.
And its significance is still being recognized today. In 2024, nearly a century later, Time Out magazine ranked it as the best animated short film of all time.
This decades-long stream of recognition just underscores its foundational role.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and arguably where Steamboat Willie had its most profound and contentious impact outside of entertainment, the nearly century-long legal battle over its copyright.
Yes. This film didn't just entertain. It became the central figure in decades of debate about American intellectual property law. It spent 95 years under copyright protection in the U.S.
A story that shows the immense political and financial power of the studio dedicated to its protection.
Absolutely. The initial copyright was filed in 1928. Under the laws then, it was set to enter the public domain in 1955.
But that didn't happen.
No. A renewal pushed it to 1986. Then, the Copyright Act of 1976 extended it again to 2003.
And the final, most famous or infamous extension happened in 1998, pushing the limit all the way to the end of 2023.
Yes, the Copyright Term Extension Act of 1998, or the CTE Act. This legislation became known pejoratively as the Mickey Mouse Protection Act.
Right, referencing the widespread claim that Congress responded to extensive and very effective lobbying by the Walt Disney Company.
Essentially, this one 7-minute cartoon became the legal yardstick that kept delaying the public domain for everyone else. It was the film that legally stopped time for 70 years.
The tenacity of Disney's legal defense is incredible. But they didn't just lobby for extensions, they also had to fight off challenges that argued the film was already in the public domain.
That's correct. Back in the 1990s, the controversy centered on a researcher, Gregory S. Brown, who argued that the original 1928 copyright notice had fundamental errors.
And under the strict rules of the Copyright Act of 1909, those errors should have nullified the protection entirely. What was the supposed mistake on the foundational document for this global asset?
The issue was the copyright notice on the film itself. Brown pointed out there were 2 extra names, the distributor's name inserted between Walt Disney's name and the actual copyright statement. Under the strict, literal interpretations of the 1909 Act, a seemingly small clerical mistake like that could have made the entire copyright void.
It's wild to think such a huge asset hung on a comma or a name placement.
But that was the nature of the law then. And this claim was taken seriously enough to generate significant academic interest. A Georgetown University law student wrote a paper confirming it.
And Disney responded aggressively, right? The sources say they threatened a slander of title lawsuit against the student.
They did. They were basically claiming that just suggesting the film was public domain was damaging their property rights. It's a powerful show of legal force intended to shut down the discussion.
But they never actually sued.
No, they ultimately chose not to, likely realizing the negative publicity of suing a student over academic research. But it shows the lengths they were willing to go.
But time is the ultimate equalizer. After 95 years, the clock finally ran out. Steamboat Willie officially entered the U.S. public domain on January 1st, 2024.
And immediately, the subtle but critical distinction between copyright and trademark came into sharp focus for everyone.
This is a crucial point for you, the listener. Only the copyright of the specific 1928 black and white film expired.
Precisely. The character design is now free to use in creative works, but the brand is still protected. Later, updated versions of Mickey remain copyrighted. But more importantly, Disney can continue to claim protection for the 1928 version under trademark law.
Because trademark protection can be renewed perpetually, as long as the owner proves ongoing usage of that image as a brand identifier.
And Disney has very actively proven that ongoing usage, most notably by using a clip from Steamboat Willie, the iconic whistling, as the basis for the Walt Disney Animation Studios production logo since 2007.
So that active, prominent use helps cement their trademark claim.
It does. It prevents new creators from using the 1928 image in a way that implies it's an official Disney product. You can make a horror movie with the character, but you can't title it Walt Disney Presents Steamboat Mickey's Bloody Rampage.
There is also a fascinating, unresolved ambiguity about the colors of the 1928 character. The film itself is black and white.
Yes. The complexity is about a promotional poster from 1928. This poster shows Mickey wearing red shorts and yellow gloves, which are key design elements of the modern character.
And if that poster was published and copyrighted in 1928, those colors might also be in the public domain.
They might, but the sources state it's unclear if the poster was actually published and copyrighted that year. So the copyright status of the 1928 design plus those colors is still legally unknown, which makes it risky for new creators to use them.
The whole story of the copyright extension also got entangled with modern political battles in the years leading up to 2024.
A powerful illustration of how intellectual property intersects with culture wars. In 2022, several Republican lawmakers publicly vowed to oppose any future attempts by Disney to extend the copyright term again.
And this was explicitly tied to Disney's stance against the Florida Parental Rights and Education Act.
It was. It signaled that the political landscape had shifted, making another extension highly unlikely.
And internationally, the status of the film is often very different, right? It highlights the uniqueness of the U.S. situation.
It does. In many countries, this film has been public domain for years. In Japan, for instance, the copyright for older films is often tied to the death of the director. Since Ube Works died in 1971, the sources conclude that Steamboat Willie most likely entered the public domain there in May 2020.
Which underscores just how aggressively and uniquely the U.S. government extended those copyright terms.
Absolutely.
So we've established the technical innovation and the complex legal history. Let's shift gears and look at the cultural side. Mickey Mouse's continuing cultural life. How did the studio keep the original Steamboat Willie version relevant even before the copyright ran out?
Well, Disney has masterfully used the 1928 short as a nostalgic anchor, a symbol of their heritage. As we touched on, the clip of Mickey whistling is the basis for the Walt Disney Animation Studios production logo, a fixture since 2007.
So generation after generation sees that classic image before almost every major Disney animated film.
Exactly. And they also integrate it physically into their theme parks. In the Disneyland attraction, Mickey Minnie's Runaway Railway, which opened in 2023, the original whistle sounds from the film are used, and the ship's wheel from the short is a prominent prop.
It roots the modern experience in the 1928 film.
It does. And of course, the design itself has become a beloved collector's item. For the 90th anniversary in 2019, LEGO released an official Steamboat Willie set, celebrating that classic black and white look.
They've consistently reinforced that the 1928 design is an essential part of their corporate identity.
Which, strengthens their later trademark arguments.
Moving on to the broader culture, Steamboat Willie has long been shorthand for classic, foundational animation. It's constantly parodied and paid homage to.
It's a foundational cinematic myth. Creators use it to signal nostalgia, or now a critique of corporate ownership. It's appeared in huge TV shows. A great example is The Simpsons' 1992 episode Itchy and Scratchy, the movie, which features a short, violent parody called Steamboat Itchy.
The opening of the 2008 Futurama spinoff, The Beast with a Billion Backs, also used a direct, detailed parody of the opening sequence.
Yes, demonstrating that even a decade ago, the imagery was instantly recognizable as a cultural touchstone.
And even Disney themselves paid tribute to the original short just months before the copyright expired.
They did. As part of their 100-year anniversary celebration in July 2023, they released a special called Steamboat Willie, which featured multiple copies of the vintage, anarchic Mickey character converging on the present day. It was a conscious nod to the film's historical importance, just as its copyright tenure was ending.
And then, January 1st, 2024 arrived. The sources document an immediate explosion of public domain creations.
The cultural effect was immediate and dramatic. The moment the character entered the public domain, announcements flooded the media, particularly showcasing the character in radically different, darker tones than Disney would ever allow.
That rapid pivot into the horror genre highlights the newfound freedom, doesn't it? Creators are immediately exploring tonal shifts that were simply unimaginable before.
It's the ultimate act of creative reclamation. The examples are striking. Within hours of the copyright expiration, a survival horror game called Infestation Origins was announced, featuring the 1928 design as a monster.
And the film world was just as quick to react, immediately transforming the whistling sailor into a slasher villain.
That's right. 2 slasher films were announced almost right away. The Mousetrap, a 2024 film where a murderer in a Mickey mask hunts teenagers, and a comedy horror film, Screamboat, announced for 2025, where the Steamboat Willie Mickey turns into a mutated creature on a ferry.
These projects show a clear intent to capitalize on the character's fame while subverting that sanitized corporate image.
It also immediately led to legal aftershocks, demonstrating the tension between the expiring copyright and the enduring trademark.
Right. The sources document a fascinating real-world legal skirmish. A law firm, Morgan & Morgan, planned an ad based on the film.
And when Disney declined to formally state whether they would sue over potential trademark infringement, the law firm took the highly unusual step of suing Disney in September 2025 to force a clarification.
That's incredible, suing a company just to force them to state their legal position on public domain usage. It's an immediate test case of that trademark boundary.
It demonstrates the eagerness of creators to test the limits. However, the litigation was dropped just 2 months later, suggesting maybe they reached some private clarity, or just decided the legal risk was too great.
Regardless, these actions illustrate the intense cultural and commercial tensions surrounding the expiration of such a significant copyright. The legal fight didn't end on January 1st, it just shifted venues.
Exactly.
This has been a complete journey, from an anxious test screening with spittoons and bedsheets to a legislative and legal epic that reshaped copyright law for decades. Steamboat Willie, a 7-minute cartoon, is truly a nexus point for cinematic innovation, the birth of a global brand, and a monumental case study in intellectual property debate.
That's the perfect synthesis. The lasting history of this film is less about the cartoon itself and far more about the profound, decades-long consequences of its existence. From technically defining synchronized sound for animation to politically shaping U.S. copyright terms, its legacy is inescapable and continues to evolve right before our eyes.
So, as you reflect on the continuing cultural life of this icon, here's a final question for you to consider. Given the enduring power and simplicity of the original 1928 black and white design, how does the emergence of countless new, unofficial, and often horror-themed versions of Mickey Mouse challenge the concept of corporate ownership over foundational cultural myths? Does the public domain truly allow a cultural figure to evolve radically beyond the decades-long vision and control of its original creator?
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.